that we want, we use different words to describe this. There needs to be a correction to the pay of teachers so that we can start to address the crisis in teacher recruitment and the crisis in teacher retention. Our schools need to be properly funded to award any such correction, and we're calling for the government to invest in this generation of children. The NEU has another strike on Tuesday. We will start a reballot. The government requires reballots every 6 months, but we're in anticipation that we can coordinate action in the autumn term with other unions. And I think it's important to say to Gillian Keegan, I'll stop with this, she can't outsource this problem to the STRB. The STRB is not an untrammeled independent process. The government appoints the members, it sets the remit, it sets the affordability limit. The STRB is not binding arbitration. It makes a recommendation, but the Secretary of State can still vary it. And so the STRB is unlikely to be the settlement of this dispute. Only Gillian Keegan can settle it. She should be working with us now to find a solution to end the dispute.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Paul, and good afternoon, colleagues. Really grateful to Paul and the NAHT for allowing us to gate crash your conference in this way. But these are important times, and the significance of 4 union general secretaries being aligned in this way, I don't think should be understated. It's a real demonstration of unity on our part and determination on the part of us and our members after weeks, if not months, of stonewalling from the Secretary of State. I mean, as a reminder, colleagues, not that you need reminding, Gillian Keegan was asked us to consult our members over her pay offer. And we did that, colleagues. We did that in good faith. And our members told her what they thought of her pay offer, that it's neither fair nor reasonable. 2 words that the Secretary of State keeps on using, fair and reasonable. Neither of those. Neither does it provide for pay restoration. And since the time of our consultation with our members, and since our members emphatically rejected that pay offer, the Secretary of State has gone to ground. She's not talking to us. Yep. Now, her haste to strike a weak and underfunded deal in just 6 days has seriously backfired. Hence, we're here today. It's galvanised not just us, but actually our members, rank and file classroom teachers and school leaders, who are now going to be balloted for industrial action through our 4 unions. Now, I hear the Prime Minister is saying that unions need to negotiate. Well, our 4 unions want nothing more than to be able to sit down and negotiate. We've repeatedly asked the Secretary of State to return to the negotiating table. She started negotiations and now she should see them through. It's the Secretary of State, just to be clear, the Secretary of State, not the STRB, that will make the decisions in respect of teachers' pay. Now, I understand that Secretary of State says that she's a good negotiator, but I have to tell you this, I'm not so sure. We're not so sure that the Secretary of State is a good negotiator or that she's up to the job. And if Gillian Keegan isn't capable of finding a resolution to our disputes, then the government needs to find someone who is up to the job. Someone up to the job of fixing that crisis in recruitment and retention, of dealing with the real funding pressures that Kevin referred to in our schools, of ending the toxic culture of excessive workload and high working hours, and giving teachers and head teachers the pay and rewards that they deserve. So our members are saying today that they've been left with no other option. If the government walks away from the table after the crisis that they've created over 13 years, then we have been forced to ballot our members, and we are doing so this term so that we, together with our sister trade unions, ASCL, NAHT and the NEU, our members will be standing together to demonstrate the power of the teaching profession and the opposition of teachers to pay restraint and cuts to real terms pay. So once again today, I have to say this to Gillian Keegan: return to the negotiating table. Work with us to agree a deal on pay that will command the support of the teaching profession, or deal with the consequences.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Very pleased to be here. I wanted to say three things briefly. I wanted to say something about us. I wanted to say something about ASCL members and what they're saying. And I wanted to say something about the government. But I start by saying this is quite a moment, isn't it? I never thought I would be sitting talking about the fact that 24,000 ASCL members, those eligible, have said to us, we reject that pay deal, and we want a formal ballot for strike action. Not for action short of strike action. We've rejected that, because action short of strike action won't send out the seriousness and the urgency of the message that the government in its parallel universe appears not to be hearing at the moment. We went into those talks in good faith. They were bizarre and surreal in many times. But what we did, and you won't have seen it, but we saw it, we did not play the union barons. We gave an absolute evidence-based case that unless you, the Secretary of State, and you, the Schools Minister, and you from Number 10, and you from the Treasury, start to understand the serious crisis that the people we represent in leadership unions and the people the teacher unions represent, that we are unable to recruit those people, we're unable to retain those people, and the workload issues need to be tackled. That was the case we made, and we provided absolute evidence for it, and yet here we are, finding ourselves where we are. I run a leadership organisation. If I was leading a school and I had a crisis between me and some of our staff, I would pick the phone up and I would say, what do we need to do behind the scenes to sort this out? And the nation's parents are watching on and saying, why is the government not trying to sort this out? We're here on a bank holiday weekend because we want this sorted out on behalf of children and young people. My second point is ASCL members. And what they're saying to me ever so strongly is that enough is enough. We have to do something to enable the job we came into leadership to be able to do, to recruit teachers, to retain teachers, to be able to provide facilities and services, support for young people. We have to be able to do that. That is about pay, it's about conditions, it is around funding. And again, it feels from where we are as if the Treasury, Number 10, the government, is entirely in a parallel universe when it comes to funding. They think that they in Whitehall, by holding some webinars, can tell the people who are running our schools and the governors who are running our schools how much money they've got in their budget. I was in a school this week which, even with the additional money which we fought for and got from the Chancellor in the autumn term, even with that, has got a deficit of £200,000. So we have to do something around all of that. And with my colleagues here, this is the first opportunity to start talking about what the autumn term might look like. This is the profession fighting for the profession. And my final point would be about the government. It feels from where I sit and from what members tell me, this is a government that wants education on the cheap. They don't want to pay teachers, even though if you're a good graduate in physics or in maths, and you're looking for the kind of flexibilities that you could get if you go and work to be an accountant or whatever it might be, you won't be able to get that in teaching. You have to be in the classroom. You can't be doing that from home. You can't just go out and have a cup of coffee with your friends when you want to. There has to be something distinctively different that makes you choose to be in teaching rather than the other professions. And of course, moral purpose is part of that. And of course, giving a sense that you're bringing on the next generation to take their place as citizens. But frankly, pay is the issue as well. And the evidence is absolutely overwhelming that pay has to be restored for teachers. So, that's why we're here, and that's what the government needs to do. And you know what? The Department for Education has the title Department for Education. It doesn't feel like that. It feels to me as if we're here on behalf of parents and communities saying we're the ones now fighting for your children's opportunities. And if we're not doing it, frankly, who is? Thanks very much.
Thanks, colleagues. Just to underline Jeff's contribution there, the debate that you would have just heard in the NHC's conference there wasn't a single voice against taking action, but the tenor of the debate was doing this for the heart and soul of education and doing it to make sure that children are properly served and they get the education that they deserve. So, colleagues, we're open up for questions. I won't remember everybody's name, so please don't feel insulted if I don't call you by name, but the first hand I saw was at the back there in green.
Lisa Down from Sky News. And potentially with this coordinated action, if it takes place, how many teachers could we see walk out and how many schools could be affected?
Who wants to take that?
I mean, I think with our 4 unions, you'd find that every state school in England was affected by the dispute, and that would put you up at, 300, 400,000 teachers would be involved in taking the action, I would have thought. We don't want to take it. We want to find a solution. But with all 4 of us, and I think acting together, I think we will all pass the government's undemocratic thresholds. And so it would be an enormous response from our members.
Pardon me. Can any of you recall any similar joint proposal for coordinated action between your 4 unions or your predecessor unions in the past?
So certainly some of my colleagues have been around education longer than me, but I've been around a decade.
Thank you for that.
I've been around a decade and have never seen the coordination that we're seeing here. I think what's different about this is, and the reason why it will happen in every school, is people join different unions for different cultural reasons, and we take different approaches to things, although very sympathetic to each other, and we try very hard not to step on each other's toes. But it's become so difficult now, the erosion in quality, that actually what's happening here is the profession is saying that they've completely lost confidence in the government, and therefore the government will lose their cooperation in the profession, and they're appealing to us to work together to organise that. So I think that's what the difference is.
Could I just make just one additional comment, Richard, if that's all right? I think it is unprecedented, so I completely agree. Except in one respect. Now, what the Secretary of State says, and she says it every time she meets us, and there's a truth in this, that during the very early part of her tenure, back in the autumn term, she says that she was able to secure additional funding through the Chancellor. That was announced in the autumn statement, to which we salute her and say thank you. The reality is that all 4 of us, working with other organisations as well, National Governance Association was involved, Parent Kind, if I recall, was involved, CST was involved. We sent a letter to every backbench MP in the Conservative Party, and we simply set out, using the School Cuts website, the implications if the Chancellor didn't find more money. And the implications were, here's the number of teaching assistants and teachers from every school in your constituency. I know that seriously spooked the government, because the backbench MPs were the ones who were putting the pressure on the Chancellor. So all credit to the Secretary of State, but it is also an indication of how that working together and identifying here's the problem, here is the solution, did lead to a partial solution. It hasn't gone far enough, but nevertheless a partial solution. So the early signs in terms of how we can coordinate, I think, were there in that campaign back in the autumn term.
Bradman. I've ignored Bradman 3 times, so.
That's all right, I'm quite okay with being ignored. Strikes that close schools mean that there will be other parents, working parents, losing money, taking days off to look after their children at home. What have you got to say to parents about how they should think about these strikes? Because many of them may not be happy with them.
I don't mind who takes it.
Shall I kick off on that one? Thanks for that, Branwyn. And let's be clear, our members are not happy about taking strike action. It's the last thing our members want to do. It's the last thing teachers and head teachers want to be doing. We've tried absolutely everything to get the government to the table and to get the government to engage in genuine dialogue. We've even implored the services of ACAS to try to broker negotiations with the government, and that has been rejected by the government. I think parents understand the sheer level of frustration and indeed desperation that many teachers are feeling right now.
I want to I absolutely agree with everything Patrick has just said. The bit that we don't want to take strike action, and the bit that we think we have a parental audience. We would sincerely apologise to parents for disrupting their children's education if we're pushed to that, and we would sincerely apologise to them for disrupting their home and their working lives. However, what we're seeing is disruption in children's education every week of the school year. At our recent conference, I was talking with a teacher, a physics teacher, and in his school, physics A-level class taught only half the timetabled time. The A-level students have self-study the other half of the time because they don't have a physics teacher to cover them. That is disruption to education in every week of the school year. And you can repeat, I put that on my social media and was astonished myself actually by the number of teachers, not just physics teachers, in such a range of subjects, repeating that story. Schools that have abandoned teaching computer studies because they can't get computer studies teachers. And if your child wants to do computer studies, then that is a huge impact on every bit of their education. We don't want to take this action. We don't want to disrupt, but the disruption is there every day, and we are calling on the government to act. And I think parents will support us and put pressure on government to invest in their children's education.
Just a very quick thing from me on that question. When talking to NAHT members, school leaders, taking action that will affect and disrupt education is anathema to them. It is to everybody, but their job is to keep the show on the road no matter what. So it perhaps weighs just a little bit longer in their consideration. But what they're now saying is things have got so bad that continuing to keep that show on the road is complicit in the destruction of education, and they're no longer prepared to be complicit in that.
Given the scale of the unprecedented nature of this coordination, are we looking at and assuming you all pass the threshold, are we looking at the biggest strikes to hit the education sector on record?
So I'll start. I mean, I think the only hesitation in kind of confirming the premise of that question is we're yet to plan exactly what we're going to do. So the steps now are to get through the thresholds and then to sit and meet and discuss what coordinated action actually looks like once we're through those thresholds. So it's a difficult question to answer one way or the other. Potentially, yes, but we don't know what that action looks like right now. But I think the important part about your question is whatever it looks like, it can be avoided. There will be a period of time between now, when we announce this coordination, when we get through the ballots and when we begin to call those days, for the government to come back to the table, to sit down with us and to find a solution to these problems. Simply taking your bat and ball home because we didn't agree with you and say, well, that's it, we'll turn our back on children and we'll stick our fingers up at the education profession is really a mark of insecurity. What this government needs to do is to sit down with us, find a way through. They are probably closer to a solution than they think, but actually trying to demonstrate that they're tough is backfiring on everybody.
I mean, I would add to that, you know, and it wasn't us that rejected the government's pay offer. It was our members. It was the teaching profession that rejected it. And the teaching profession, ordinary teachers who are working their socks off each and every single day, are looking aghast at a government that's asked for their view and now refuses to engage with them. That is remarkable. So unprecedented industrial action, well, unprecedented circumstances. The fact that we have 4 unions representing the overwhelming majority of the teaching profession in this country are in formal disputes with the government. That's pretty unprecedented. The fact that we have one of the worst recruitment and retention crises since the Second World War, that's pretty unprecedented. The fact the government can't recruit enough students into initial teacher training and is missing its targets right across the board, that's pretty unprecedented. So for me and for my union, and I'm sure for my other colleagues here, this isn't about, our focus is not about the strikes that could result as follow ballots taking place this term, but rather the unprecedented nature of the disputes with a government that frankly isn't listening and doesn't seem to be prepared or willing to engage in talks to resolve the central issues of concern to the teaching profession.
Hello, it's Sam from Schools Week. You just touched on the coordinated action, and you might not be able to answer this yet, but what could that potentially look like? Have you got anything on the table about what that would look like? And also, what is the updated demand of government? Has that changed at all since the initial dispute began?
So just to start, but I'll let colleagues come in. I think it's not dodging the question, it's just simply too early to begin to paint a picture of what that action would look like. We need to, as I say, get through those thresholds. But the importance of this press conference is laying that marker down that it's the whole profession that has rejected this pay offer. Soundly rejected it. I mean, the ballot results, the consultation ballot results from all 4 unions were not close things. You know, they were absolutely unequivocal about rejection. So we now have to plan that. But we're planning it in a window when government can talk to us. And actually, let's make sure that all of this is unnecessary and that we sit down with government and we find a solution. And if we're close to finding solutions, then that will give us consideration about what that action may or may not look like. But colleagues, does anybody want to add to that?
Just echo what Paul said, just say it in slightly different ways, Sam, and there's a response also to Brammer's question about parents. The end game of all of this is not that we want to have industrial action. The end game of this is we don't want to have industrial action.
Absolutely.
Now, the fact that we're all here today talking about that is giving a window of opportunity, and you heard Paul's words, maybe the government is closer to a deal than they realise here. Why are they not talking about that? Why are they not just having that conversation to see whether we can have a deal that we can put to our members, that our members say, both in terms of pay now, pay restoration, in terms of working conditions, in terms of it then being fully funded, those things are things that are going to be committed to. So there is a window of time for government to do that. But the fact we're here talking about it, even though it's very early days with it, must send out a very, very urgent message to them that the tactics being used at the moment by them, the denial that they're in, is actually going to make things tougher for them, because there's going to be a hardening of attitudes, I think, by lots of teachers who think this isn't just about pay, it's about being treated with contempt by the government.
I think it's building on that, and it's just adding to something that Jeff said in his opening remarks, that in the negotiations, the intensive talks with Gillian Keegan, we weren't thumping the table, making demands because of threats of strike action. We were presenting evidence. We presented evidence from the National Foundation for Education Research. We presented evidence from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. We presented evidence from Public First, as well as evidence that our unions had developed themselves. And one of the central themes of that was that teacher pay has declined compared with other pay in the economy. And those bodies agreeing with that, putting numbers on it, and saying that that was a fundamental factor in the teacher recruitment and retention crisis. We have a solid base of evidence behind the assertions that we're making, that the crisis that's developing in schools, you can understand the reasons why, and government could put them right. And since those meetings with Gillian Keegan, all the numbers about teacher recruitment seem to be getting worse. We're reading what Jack Worth, the education economist with the NFER, writes about these things. I'm sure you're looking at them as well, but Jack is suggesting that the government might be only at 50% of its target for secondary recruitment, and as well as missing the target for primary teacher recruitment last year, we'll miss it by a bigger amount this year. And our concern is that these things develop into, if in a school you're a head of department, a key stage head, or a head teacher, and you're having to deal with the fact that you can't find teachers or that they leave, then that increases the amount of time you have to spend on induction, that increases your workload, it leads to more teacher turnover, and so the situation can start to spiral out of control. We think we have a solid evidence base, and the government should be acting on that, not waiting for the threat of industrial action that we're discussing.
Hi, John Roberts from TES. Do you think this show of unity that you're putting on today might shift the government, or do you think it might lead them to harden their stance? And how long do you think this could go on for? How long would you be willing to be on a kind of industrial action footing? Thank you.
I think the kind of the first thing I'd offer in that is you never go into industrial action lightly, and you go in it with a view to trying to avoid having to take it. But it's a mark of the determination of our members. It's not a mark of the determination of the four of us sitting here. Our job as General Secretaries is to organise protest against the frustration and the difficulties that our members face day in and day out. And they're doing that because they're now prevented from delivering the job that they need to do and looking after children in the way that they want to look after them. So if the government does harden its attitude, if it wants to look tough, that's going to backfire, because that's going to damage children more than a single strike day would do, because it will continue and perpetuate the difficulties that are in the system right now. So all we can do is appeal to government and say this is a tangible demonstration of how bad things have got. The fact that all of us have come together is a tangible demonstration of how bad things have got. They have an opportunity to bring the profession back together in terms of what happens in schools. They have an opportunity to reward people properly, lift the jeopardy in terms of accountability, and to solve the workload issues that are there. And they can do that quickly, and they can change things in schools very quickly and improve things. That's the path they should be following, and they should meet us around the table as quickly as possible.
And I mean, we've also been absolutely clear throughout, including with the Secretary of State, that we're willing to talk and that we are committed to that. That negotiations are about compromise. We've been absolutely clear about that as well. So we aren't. This is not about posturing. I mean, to be absolutely frank, that's not what our members want, and it's not what they deserve. This is about striking a deal which will command the support of the generality of teachers and head teachers in this country. But that you can only do that. You can only resolve a dispute in any walk of life if you're prepared to talk to each other. And that's what we're asking the Secretary of State to do, to show that, you know, that she has the courage of her stated convictions, which is that she wants to negotiate and she wants to see better for children's education. Well, you're going to do that by getting around the table and engaging in that dialogue. A solution can be found. We're prepared to find that solution. We're prepared to strike a compromise and to reach a deal, but it requires the government also to share our ambitions.
Hi, my question is, why are you taking this coordinated action now? Why not back in December, January, when members were balloted? If you could sum up what's happened in the past 4 months?
Yeah, I mean, so the NEU passed the ballot thresholds, and our members have taken some strike action since then. And I just want to say to you that our members are like members of the other unions. And their feeling is that they are engaged in a dispute with a high moral purpose. They are trying to put right the crisis in their schools. They are concerned about the pay. They're also concerned in an overwhelming way about the funding. They don't believe what the government is saying about funding. But in terms of what has brought us to this period of coordination right now, Patrick spoke about this. The misguided offer that the government put to us, which was too low and not funded, that has led to the response from the memberships of all 4 of our organisations. And that commonality has come from government's poor offer, from them not reading the room. And, well, we were explaining it in the room. We were explaining the situation facing our schools, but government has so far not read the room, so they've brought about the coordination.
Max Stevens from the Telegraph. What would you say to the argument that there simply isn't the money in the government's coffers to fund or to give the pay rise that your members are demanding, along with other public sector workers?
Well, we happen to live in the 6th richest nation in the world, so the money's there if the government chooses to spend it. It's a policy decision about whether you invest in education or whether you try and do education on the cheap. We've done education on the cheap for well over a decade now, and we're beginning to see the damage and the cracks in the system. And I think it's a real testament to the profession that it's lasted for this long under that much pressure and delivered great education for as long as it has. But what our members are telling us is they can no longer achieve that anymore. And the biggest kind of piece of evidence about that is how many teachers and school leaders are leaving the profession and how few want to join the profession. And soon we're going to run out of people. We won't have enough people in schools, we won't have enough adults in schools to look after the young people that deserve a better education. And actually it's a false economy, isn't it? If we can't make sure that we educate our future doctors, if we can't make sure that we educate our future engineers, if we can't make sure that we educate those that will work in financial services, then actually the prospects for this economy grow weaker and weaker. So the action we're going to take isn't just on behalf, or the action our members are going to take isn't just on their own behalf. It's on behalf of children, but actually it's on behalf of the nation as well.
I mean, the government would like to say, well, there's no more money there, and that's a matter that can be debated, can be interrogated, and if they're willing to sit down and talk to us, then we can perhaps talk about some of the options in which they can find some of the money that's needed. But at the same time, the government is asserting that the money is there in school budgets to pay for a pay award. I mean, actually one of the things that was very common in the experiences that all 4 unions had in speaking to their members about the government's pay offer was, not only was there concern about the headline nature of the offer in terms of the unconsolidated awards for this year, and let's take the government's figure, 4.5% average for next year. But our members were deeply concerned that the money was not there. That despite the government's assertions, the money simply wasn't there. And Jeff's already referred to, very clear examples of, the experiences that schools are having right here, right now, that are struggling to make ends meet. So, the government has got to be brought under some scrutiny here as well. We tried that in the negotiations, and we were told we couldn't talk about it. I mean, let's be honest about this. It's not that we aren't trying to find a resolution to this stuff which will command the support of the profession. 6 days of talks to try and resolve a deep dispute. Frankly, hit and run accident doesn't begin to describe it. No wonder it has backfired so incredibly badly for the Secretary of State. The money can be found. And the money needs to be found to fund that pay award for the teaching profession. That's the choice the government faces. Now, Secretary of State is also saying that she's now relying on the STRB to come forward with a recommendation which will resolve these matters. Well, unless she knows something that I don't, she doesn't know what the STRB is going to be recommending. And if they recommend more than she has put on the table thus far, what is the Education Secretary going to say at that point? The money's not there? Either we've got a review body process or we don't, or is it that the Secretary of State is now dictating the rules of the game, how the game is going to be played, and who the winner is going to be at the end of that game?
I'd also like to say something on the funding question, because of course the language of politics is the language of priorities, isn't it? And it depends on what you decide to prioritise as a government. Sometimes I hear politicians speak and it seems to me they're saying, when the economy improves, we will put some investment in schools then. Well, that's just not good enough for this generation of children. The generation of children hit so hard by COVID, they need investment in their schools now. And that should be a priority for the government, both for those individual children, but as in the way that Paul spoke earlier, if you want an economy that has some growth in it, you need education. You need to invest in your public services. You need to invest in education. So we're calling for the government to exercise the right priorities and to prioritise the children in our schools.
Colleagues, we're on quite a tight timetable. I know you all will be as well. So I've just kind of looked to colleagues on this table to see if there's anything in closing they'd like to say. But if not, we'll thank you very much for your attendance and carry on with the day.